Say hello to Pete Prisco's Mock Draft 2.0. If you go to CBSSports.com, Pete will tell you he loves pro days. Still loves Will Levis in the top 10 when many have strayed away from 4 quarterbacks in the top 10. And if you're curious, Pete's going to put a couple more mocks before the draft, including also a who they should draft mock. Richardson at 3 with the trade with the Cardinals. We'll get into that in just a second, but first things first, let's welcome in the aforementioned Pete Prisco and Brady Quinn joining us here. So, Pete, let's start at the very top, though. Carolina, we know they made the trade, so there's no mock situation there. C.J. Stroud, you have number 1, but I think the first version of your mock draft there, you had Bryce Young at number 1, so what's changed?
So now in the third one, I'm going to go back because I don't think they know. I really don't think they know. You hear so many differing things coming out of there, and believe me, I talk to people in there. They don't know right now. My lean is to Stroud because I think he fits with Frank Reich and what he wants in a quarterback. I don't think you want a quarterback who's 5'10". And by the way, word is he weighed 188 at his pro day, which is why he didn't weigh in. He's small, he's tiny. He's the best pure quarterback in this class. But do you trade up to draft a guy first overall who's 5'10" and 185 pounds?
It's a valid question in regards to durability. That was not really an issue at Alabama. He's been that size for a long time, playing at Bama and even playing at one of the more prolific high schools in the country in modern day in Southern California. So the reality is, when talking about Bryce Young, that's really the only concern you do have. With C.J. Stroud, you're right, there's not the concern of durability. If there was concerns about mobility, as we can see right here, he answered a lot of those questions. To me, it's all the things that, I was talking about with Rick Spielman the other day. His level of play dropped dramatically when he was being pressured, when he would get hit, especially early in games. And he's going to be drafted to a team, the Carolina Panthers, that don't have one of the better offensive lines.
It's gotten better, though.
It has gotten better, but we're not calling them a top 10 offensive line, are we, Pete? So he's going to be pressured. He's going to have to move off the spot. He's going to have to display more of that mobility, more so like he did in the Georgia game, but every single week when he's in there as a starting quarterback.
I'm going to say this. I put it out there. If I would not have traded up for anybody in this class. And I know you have to solve your quarterback position. I think this is a year where you traded up to go get a franchise quarterback, and every single one of them has issues. Every one of them. In fact, there are guys that don't think there's first-round talent with these guys. They should be second-round picks, but you force the position. You know that. You always force the position, and you have to until you solve it. I get it.
To not say C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young are first-round talent.
That's not what I'm saying. I didn't say that.
And you can tell the scout or whoever's telling you that I said that.
Okay.
They have no clue what they're talking about.
But
these guys are first-round talented quarterbacks. You can make the case that maybe it was too much for them to move up. The reality is, they've tried everything at this point, and they haven't been able to solve the quarterback issue.
Correct.
David Tepper doesn't have a lot of patience, and they want to get this thing turned around. C.J. Stroud would make a lot of sense. I like that you went this direction because the money talks, too. If I'm not mistaken, C.J. Stroud's the favorite right now to go number 1 overall.
Minus 280, and it was really since the Combine that those odds flipped from Bryce Young. But real quickly, again, with Carolina taking this stand so early, you don't think they have a favorite yet, Pete, in terms of whether it's Stroud or Young, or do you think they got all the way up to number 1 to vet maybe these two out?
No, I think they vetted all 4 of them out, to be honest with you. I really do.
So they made the move without knowing who they were going to pick? Yeah, it's awfully hard to do, though.
Correct. What are we on, like The Bachelorette? And you got 4 roses out there? I mean, you're going to make this big leap of faith. You better have one guy that you're sold on.
Well, you do go through the process. They were still going through the process when they made the move. And obviously, that's part of the problem with the quarterback position. There's nobody you say, yes, I got to go up and trade for him. There isn't, and that's why I wouldn't have done it.
What would you have done? Sat back and just, I don't know.
Maybe moved up to 4 or 5 and grabbed one of them.
Okay.
I mean,
not necessarily the guy you're in love with, though.
Well, clearly they're not in love with. They weren't in love with anybody. They went to all the pro days and they went through all the process.
I think there's someone that they've targeted that they do.
Believe me, they weren't in love with anybody.
Speaking what would you have done? You've done something in a mock that I don't see a lot of people, including Ryan Wilson, do, which is yes, the Colts are going to take Anthony Richardson, but in your version of your mock draft, they have to actually go from 4 to 3. To get there. So before we get to the compensation, why did you feel the need that you think Indianapolis actually has to move up in position to get Anthony Richardson?
Because I think there's fear of teams going to that spot to get Anthony Richardson. And again, if you go quarterback, which we pretty much know we think it's going to go that way, almost assured it's going that way. Then if you want a quarterback, are you going to sit there and wait at 4, or are you going to hope like heck that that he falls to, or you're going to go make the move to be bold and go get him? And I think when you look at the Colts, Anthony Richardson could fit in with what they do. The system would be, they put in place would be similar to what they did with Jalen Hurts, and I think he could sit for a while behind Gardner Minshew because he's a project, but he's got a ton of talent.
There's so many things that I need to question about.
Well, Gardner Minshew, I wouldn't say
not the trade, though. I think this is smart because to your point, Las Vegas is probably talking Arizona right now, maybe the Tennessee Titans, some other teams who are back there that might want to look to trade up. That number 3 pick is going to be the pick that's going to get they're going to get talked about often. The interesting thing is, and we've done this with Pete now for a while, he loves Will Levis. He doesn't have Will Levis in this spot. Will Levis could also do some of the things that Shane Steichen did with Jalen Hurts. He's a very good athlete and a capable runner. Why not your guy, Will Levis?
Because I just changed up. That's why, for the sake of doing a mock draft. And here's why. Because I actually do hear from people in the league that the Colts like Will Levis a ton. They do. There's just been you hear some things about Will Levis.
What do you hear?
Well, I mean, how is he in interviews? He hasn't been. Teams have had questions about him in interviews. I necessarily don't consider that to be a major problem in my book. But I think the Colts like him. So you might be onto something. And when I actually do the draft, they might trade up to go get Will Levis because they're fearful of maybe the Raiders doing it.
It is interesting, though. Did you notice who he said would be the guy to start off the season for the Colts? It's Gardner Minshew, who you've never been really big on.
Bridge quarterback.
But now he's the bridge quarterback for.
That's what he is. He's a bridge quarterback. He was out there for everybody to sign. He got a 1-year deal. He got a 1-year deal. I mean, it's not like he's a starter in this league.
Good for him, though.
God bless him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wish we had Rick here, by the way, because the compensation you put on CBS
2
Sports.com.
3s. It added up.
3 this year, 3 next year, Brady. Does that sound fair to you?
Look at the
How many?
one.
Look at the
A
draft.
third this year or third next year?
Yeah.
Okay, the draft chart would probably say it's about right. Are those compensatory picks? Or
Yeah. No, they're regular picks.
If the
It adds
compensatory
up.
picks, teams look at them kind of like, hey.
Yeah. No, it adds up. Believe me, I went and did the work.
I'm sure.
So Rick Spielman, by the way, Howie Roseman took Rick Spielman to the cleaners on the Sam Bradford trade, so he can't talk about anybody's trade.
That's a completely different scenario.
Just had that in your back pocket to throw it?
Right before the season.
Because you know why? Because Rick gives me crap about everything I do, so I just give it back to him.
All right. Speaking of Will Levis, you still have him rated fairly high, and we've seen whether it's through editors having guys move their picks. We've seen Will Levis, I should say, start to drop down the board, but not for you, Pete White.
No, again, it goes back to what we were talking about. If you don't have a quarterback, you got to try and solve it, and you got to continue to try and solve it and get that guy. This kid has all the talent in the world. It's just a matter of can you get it out of him. It's the hardest evaluation, one of the hardest evaluations of a quarterback I've ever had to do, and Brady can attest to this because he knows. When you play, if you put Will Levis at Ohio State and allowed him to play with all those players, how would he have been?
He would have been probably better than what he had at Kentucky. The problem is, and the issue that I see with his play, it's not the capability, it's not his ceiling. It's the inconsistency with his accuracy at all 3 levels. And that's one thing that you never can say about C.J. Stroud. He's a surgeon back there. So
he has all the time in the world.
When you sit there and say, oh, well, first off, he didn't versus Michigan, didn't versus Georgia, didn't versus Iowa earlier in that game the way that defense played. So you can say that. The reality is, if Will Levis was in his shoes, I don't know, maybe he's not making the same throws as C.J. Stroud. We don't know, so we can't play that game. But it's a game you like to play because you want to defend him. I'll say this about him. I think if given the opportunity in the right situation and circumstance and a place like Las Vegas with Josh McDaniels, he will and can succeed. He doesn't have to start right away. He's got Jimmy Garoppolo. You can clean up some of the inconsistencies that you see in his footwork. And I think his eyes, too, which sometimes you see, especially in a new system, which he had this past year with Rich Gangarello.
Terrible system.
It was a bad system, but also I think it's a new system. I think it took him some time, too, to get even more comfortable, even though he's playing banged up. He's going to have a learning curve with the Raiders, and especially with Josh McDaniels' system that puts a lot on the quarterback. You give him time to learn. I think he can be successful with the Las Vegas Raiders.
The pressure stats are absolutely incredible when you compare how many times he was pressured to how many times a guy like C.J. Stroud was pressured. And by the way, over the last 5 or 6, 7, 8 years, I think the pressure numbers, if you look at his pressure numbers,
but that more speaks to the SEC.
You know who they compare to? His pressure numbers in college? Yeah. Patrick Mahomes played at a small school in a big. Josh Allen. They're comparable.
Oh, so he's going to be.
I'm not saying he's going to be them.
Well, why
I'm
are you
just
bringing
saying
up that?
because here's what that kid had to deal with: no receivers, a crappy offensive line, a running back who runs 4.8. He was getting bad offensive coordinator
who was one of the more productive running backs.
Okay, an offensive coordinator who lasted 1 year because the system stunk, and he had got shots in his shoulder and his toe the entire year.
He was in a walking boot as well.
Okay, so
you were making a case to defend him.
Because you know why? It's become a blood sport to kill the kid.
Well,
it reminds me of Josh Allen 100% all over again. I'm not saying he's going to be Josh Allen, but the same people who are ripping this kid to shreds were the same people who were ripping Josh Allen to shreds. Same ones.
I'm not disagreeing with you, and I'm not saying that I'm not a fan of Will Levis. You've taken
I'm
this
not saying
on,
you.
though, but you've taken this on, though, as like you think he should be the first quarterback taken in this draft class. And the truth is, you've changed your tune on that.
I'm not. I told you I don't want to pick any of them. I'll be honest with you. If I'm forced to pick one, I probably would pick them.
So Brady's saying Pete put these quarterbacks in tiers, then they're all in one tier. Now they're sort of divided up in different tiers.
You wouldn't take any of them.
Right.
I don't want. I wouldn't trade up to take. I promise you this with 100% certainty. If I was a general manager in the NFL, I would not trade up to take any of them.
And the interesting thing is, you could be a general manager that's in a position where you don't have a job next year to make that selection because you didn't take a quarterback.
All right, let's move on. So after the string of quarterbacks goes, 4 in the top 7, there is a run on offensive tackles, Brady. What questions, if any, do you have there for Pete in the top, 13 picks?
Yeah, I mean, it's just how you're kind of ranking them here. You got Pete Skoronski, which I don't believe you had as the first tackle taken the last one. Makes a lot of sense. Look, played at Northwestern. His film's great. I think he's going to be a day one starter wherever he gets drafted. So you could see him going to Chicago. It's a need. He fits there, too. I think the persona of what they're looking for. I personally feel like, though, Paris Johnson Jr. will be the first tackle taken in this year's draft class.
Well,
I think he's phenomenal. It's a need for Tennessee here, too.
Well, I got him taking him, and I think he's going to be a guard, Skoronski. I do.
Okay.
I think he's going to be a guard. I really do. And I think they might move, if they drafted him, they might move Tevin Jenkins, like you talked about, back out to tackle, and he would play guard. I think his arms are too short to play tackle. I think he's going to be a good guard. I'm with you. I think the kid from Ohio State, Paris Johnson's the best tackle in the class. I don't think he's the best offensive lineman in the class. I think Osiris Torres is the best offensive lineman in the class.
For interior player, he's good. The center, too, out of Minnesota.
Yeah, John Michael Schmitz.
He's a great player. I mean, he's to me, a day one starter again at center. You plug and play. It's a center, though. He's probably not going to get drafted the first
And a guard, which is why they don't get drafted that high.
3 tight ends in your first round. Pete, is the position group that strong, or what's the thought process behind that?
I think it's a really good position group. And I'm not just talking about the 3. I think it goes down to 8 or 9. You're going to get a player down the line from this class. It's loaded. But I think Mayer's the best. I'm in the minority on that one. I just think he's the most well-rounded of the group. I think when you look at Laporta, that's the one. When you watch him on tape, Brady, and you did their games.
I'll say, did you watch the Iowa offense?
It was terrible. I felt bad for the kid. Oh, my gosh, the quarterback is terrible. You know what he does? He runs routes like a wide receiver. That's what he does. He's not going to be a blocking tight end. That's not what he's going to do. But he's going to catch a ton of passes. And I think Kincaid can also catch a ton of passes. But I think the most well-rounded of the group is Mayer. I think he's a big-time player.
I'm glad you did this because, you know, with all these teams, too, there's a need there. So it makes a lot of sense. I also think they're guys that even though when you think about what's on the plate for an NFL player and what's the most difficult transition mentally, besides quarterback, it's then the tight end, right? You're a part of the run blocking schemes. You're a part of, obviously, the protection schemes, either in pass pro or running a hot route or potentially a route adjustment. So there's all those things that you've got to think about. These guys are smart. They're capable. They were in systems, whether it was Notre Dame, Utah, or even Iowa, where they're pro ready. They're running run blocking schemes that are going to be the exact same thing they have to do at the NFL level. You know, the routes, everything else they were asked to do, splitting out, playing in line. All these guys are prepared for it. It's a great class. I just wonder if we're going to see teams want to spend a first-round pick on it.
Because it is a good class. Because
that's part of it. But sometimes you see a great class where they kind of get pushed back because of scarcity, right? They look at other position groups. They say, well, there's not many good ones of these, so we got to take them now, and we can get a good tight end like a Luke Musgrave. You don't have in here. But when you look, we could get him later on.
But when you look around the NFL, I mean, how many good tight ends are there in the NFL right now? There aren't many. There aren't many elite ones. There's a lot of them, but there aren't many elite ones.
And let's be very specific about these tight ends. These are your traditional tight ends, your Ys. These are guys who are going to go in there. They're going to play every down for you. They're not more the smaller mismatch types.
Right.
Which is sometimes where you see teams get enamored with the tight end position and say, we're always looking for mismatches. If we can find that guy who's like 230, 235 pounds.
Correct. Like Evan Ingram.
Like Evan Ingram. He can run like a wide receiver. We can split out, do some different things off the ball with him. A lot of times teams kind of,
the kid at Oklahoma is like that. The tight end at Oklahoma.
He's very similar too.
Right. He's a move tight end.
These aren't those, but that doesn't mean they won't go in the first round.
Let's follow up here, and we'll get to Baltimore here. We're kind of going in sequential order in the draft, but I want to talk about Bijan Robinson because right now you have him in the mid to late 20s. And speaking of position scarcity, right, there's going to be a lot of good running backs.
Why do you have him going to Dallas again? I think you haven't taken a running back in the last was a Bijan again.
Bijan Robinson.
How does this make sense?
I'm making that happen.
Dallas drafted is Zeke Elliott, and then they signed him that contract. Like, are they going to do that again with Bijan?
Well, now they've come to the conclusion that you draft them, you run them down for 4 or 5 years, and you can draft another one. You're not going to give him a second contract.
Or apparently you slap the franchise.
Well, you don't do that again. And
Well,
Pollard's coming off an injury, and and he's only on a 1-year deal, the franchise tag. So why not?
Did you just get a little tired and bored when you got the 26?
No, I like that. I like Bijan Robinson in that spot. By the way, it is a great. It's a great running back class. By the way, it's a great running back class. Would I take more than one in the first round? Again, if you ask me, would I take him in that spot? No, I would not. Would I take him in the first round? No, I would not. But somebody will take him in the first round.
But the reality is, to your, I guess, strategy, right, with the cycle of running backs, why not take a player who, to me, everyone's confident to Saquon Barkley. I think that's fair, and I think if you actually break down the stats, he was actually more productive at Texas than Saquon was at Penn State, and probably a little more consistent too. It's just their team wasn't really in the mix, so they didn't get highlighted quite as much. But wouldn't you say, hey, this is the time to draft them, but then they're probably not going to see that second contract?
In the second or third round.
I would even say for a player like this, who's going to impact your offense in the way he can, but again,
they don't decide Super Bowls. The running back position.
You could say that, but you do have to have a running game.
Isaiah Pacheco was in the
7th round.
Right.
Yeah.
you find guys. They're everywhere.
I get you can find guys, but
You think he's that special?
I think he's special. I think he's one of the top
really
overall
good.
prospects.
I think he's really good,
running back
but
position.
he's a running back, and I'm not drafting him in the first round.
All right, we saw on that list, by the way, Zay Flowers maybe helping out Lamar Jackson in Baltimore there. But let's end the conversation. Didn't see Hendon Hooker anywhere on that list there, Pete Prisco.
And he might be, eventually. I mean, you're hearing a lot of good things about him. Concerns. Obviously, there's concerns. His age. He's 25, but I guess that's not as much of a concern as it used to be with guys playing to be 40. He's coming off a knee injury.
Right.
That's a concern. He has that offense is catered to the passing game. You got to admit that.
Yeah, no, it's catered to putting up stats.
Right.
I did a comp for him. It kind of reminded me of Geno Smith out of West Virginia, where he was also in an offense that was very conducive to putting up a lot of big numbers. Things were spread out. Things are pretty wide open. It's very different than what you're going to get at the NFL level because of those really wide splits and because of how wide the hashes are. And so how you can divide the field to even create bigger throwing lanes. That being said, every time there was a guy open, he was hitting him. And he operated at a really high level at Tennessee during his time there. So you can't knock him for the system that he ran. You just have to do your due diligence.
I think he's going to go in the back end of the first round.
The type of throws that he needs to make at the NFL level.
Okay. Would I rather wait and draft Hooker at 27 than draft one of those other guys in the top 7? Yes.
I think it'll be interesting to see, depending on how things work out with Lamar Jackson, if when he gets to 22, if they wouldn't potentially look at taking Hendon Hooker, if he's there.
What about comparisons to Donovan McNabb? I've heard those as well.
Well, I would just say this about Hendon Hooker. I think I would consider him the better than guy. I know you have your better than list. He's got a better arm than you think. He's more athletic. He's a better athlete than you think.
And he might be on that better than team, Brady. You might be, that comes out next Wednesday, by the way.
Ooh, we foreshadow something?
You might.
Oh, okay.
We got to wrap things up, but quickly to button up Hooker, the injury, what's the concern level for you, do you think, there for a 25?
His game isn't mobility, is not running, so it's less of a concern than if one of the guys who moves around a lot. If Richardson had the same injury, it'd be devastating, but for him, it's not as much as a concern.
The question is, how fast would he be able to start? If you're going to take a guy in the first round, nowadays, you look at him and you say, we need to play him right away. So that's more the question, is if he can't start day one, do you want to maybe wait in the second round?
All right, Brady, certainly appreciate it. Pete, thank you very much. Check out that mock draft 2.0 on CBSSports.com. I want to remind everybody, as we near the draft process and the ending will happen soon with the first pick, Ryan Wilson and Rick Spielman. Check out the QR code. They completed their pro day run, including Anthony Richardson, which was their very last stop not too long ago.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.